In this video, we're going to show you how to replace a front axle on your Dodge Durango. This is going to be located behind the front wheel. Let's get started. Using a 22mm socket, remove all 5 lug nuts. Remove the wheel. Using a 32mm socket, remove the axle nut. Using a punch and a hammer, we're going to make sure that our axle is free inside of our hub. If yours moves freely like that, you should be good to go. If not, just give it a few taps and make sure it moves freely. Remove the ABS harness out of the plastic stays going up the brake hose. We have one metal bracket at the top here. Pull that out. We're just giving ourselves a little bit more room here. Using a E20 bit, we're going to remove the 2 caliper bolts. Break them both 3 before you remove them. Remove the caliper bolts. Be sure you have a hand on the caliper because now it's not being supported by anything. I'm going to use a caliper hook and I'm going to put this over the upper control arm or off of the spring for the shock. Remove the caliper assembly and hang it on the hook. Be sure your ABS harness is free. Be sure there's no tension hanging on your brake hose. Remove the rotor. Using a 21mm socket, we are going to remove the upper ball joint nut. Using a 22mm wrench, we're going to get around the outer tie rod nut. We're going to use a 10mm wrench to hold the stud still. Remove the nut. Pull the tie rod out of the knuckle. If you need to, you can give the top of the stud a tap. You just don't want to hit it so hard that it mushrooms so you can't get the nut over it. I'm going to use an 8mm Allen bit to hold the stud while I use a 24mm wrench to loosen the nut. Remove the nut. We're looking into the front wheel well. Pull back the fender liner in the front. You're going to find the connector for our ABS harness. We have to pull back on this red tab. Open that red locking tab, and then right there is going to be your push tab. Mine had a bunch of rocks and sand stuck in it, so it would not come apart. So I used my tool, just a little trim tool right in the front to pick up that black tab, and then I was able to pull the connector back. Using a trim tool, pop the sensor off of the frame. There's 2 Christmas tree clips in the back here. We have one more clip behind our strut. Remove the knuckle from the lower ball joint and the axle and put it off to the side. Using a 27mm socket and then a 27mm wrench or an adjustable wrench to hold the head of the bolt. We're going to remove the nut. Using a 27mm socket, we're going to remove the bolt. When this bolt comes out, this lower control arm is going to unload and it's going to push up because the bushings are going to try and go up. So this may pop when this gets out of your way. Be sure you don't have your fingers inside of here. Just like that. Using a large pry bar, we're going to pop our axle out of the transmission. Going to get right behind it on that lip right there. We're going to give this a nice good shocking push. You don't want to just put a bunch of tension on it and wait for it to pop. So we'll pop it out. We're going to use a large pry bar with a hook. And this hook is going to grab onto our lower control arm and allow us to pry down We're going to pry it all the way down so our lower control arm is lower than our strut. Slip the axle out and gently let the lower control arm back up. And install our bar with our hook. Install the axle. Line the axle up. And I like to spin it as it goes in because you'll be able to feel the teeth for the splines. Once you have it lined up, you're going to put 2 hands on the outside shaft of the axle. And this is going to be a pushing motion in, and we're going to set the axle. Shove it all the way in. You should hear 1 to 2 clicks. Give a look on the backside, and be sure that you're sitting nice and flush between the axle and the diff. Using a pry bar, we're going to get on top of the lower control arm, and we're going to put it in the groove of our shock right here. And I'm going to push the shock back as I push down on the lower control arm. And I'm going to get a pick started, or a punch started through the lower control arm. I'm going to grab my lower control arm shock bolt, and I'm going to follow this with our punch. Install the bolt, install the nut, snug the nut down, torque the lower shock bolt to 111 foot-pounds, install the grease fitting into the lower control arm, snug it down. Be sure once this is in place, it is not facing the outside towards you, because you will not be able to get a grease gun on this. It has to be facing on this 180 towards the car. Install the knuckle onto the lower ball joint and get the axle started through the hub. Get the lower ball joint nut started. I'm going to use a pry bar, and we're going to go over the upper control arm, pull down, and then hook your pry bar onto your spring. This is what we're going to use to push the upper ball joint into the knuckle. Pull it all the way through and get the nut started. Snug down the upper nut. Snug down the lower ball joint nut. Install the tie rod end into the knuckle. Get the nut started. Using a 22mm wrench, we're going to go around the nut. We're going to use a 10mm wrench to hold the stud, and we're going to snug our nut down. Get it nice and tight. Torque the outer tie rod nut to 40 foot-pounds, and then an additional 110 degrees. If you can't get a torque wrench on it, do the best you can. Torque the upper ball joint nut to 122 foot-pounds. Be sure that the stud does not spin when you do this. Torque the lower ball joint nut to 92 foot-pounds. When you do this, be sure the stud is not spinning. Install the brake rotor. Now we have an O-ring that we have to put on. Slip it around, and there's going to be a groove that's cut into the hub, and that's where that'll sit, and that'll hold your brake rotor on. Remove the caliper, and remove your caliper hanger. Install the caliper onto the brake rotor. Install the caliper bracket bolts. Get these started by hand. Snug the bolts down. Torque the caliper bracket bolts to 125 foot-pounds. Pull the ABS harness over and get it installed into these plastic stays. Get the grommet installed into the bracket. Pull the harness behind the brake line. Install this plastic stay right behind the shock. Pull the fender liner back, and we're going to install the connector to the frame. And now install the connector. Push until you hear a click. If you don't hear a click, give it a pull and make sure that red lock tab is closed. Install the axle nut, snug it down. Using a punch, we're going to stick it in the fins of our rotors against our caliper bracket so it can't spin. Torque the axle nut to 229 foot-pounds. Install the wheel. Get the lug nuts started. Snug the lug nuts down. Torque the lug nuts to 130 foot-pounds in a star pattern. And you're good to go.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.